At 3:02 a.m., a single phone call came into Burlington police. The caller said they'd heard something strange, a woman scream, sudden and sharp, piercing the silence of a sleeping neighborhood. Seconds later, there was nothing. No footsteps, no cries for help, just silence. When officers arrived minutes later, they expected the usual, a false alarm, a misunderstanding. But what they found was something different. On the sidewalk lay a cracked smartphone, its glow still flickering. Beside it, a pair of running shoes, lined up neatly, as if someone had stepped out of them and vanished into the dark. The woman who owned them was gone. Her name was Claire Jensen. She was 32 years old. To the outside world, she was a high school English teacher, a dedicated one. To her students, she wasn't just another adult at the front of the classroom. She was the one who noticed when a kid skipped lunch, the one who wrote encouraging notes in the margins of essays, the one who told them, "You can do better because I believe you can." Claire had a gift, not for lecturing, but for listening. Outside of school, she was a daughter, a sister, a best friend. She loved running along the Lake Champlain trails, baking cookies for her nieces, and reading late into the night. She was ordinary in all the best ways. And that's what makes her story so chilling. Because if someone like Claire could disappear, then couldn't it happen to anyone? Think for a moment. Who in your life is your Claire Jensen? A friend? A sibling? Someone whose absence would stop your world cold. Now, imagine waking up to learn they never came home. On May 14th, Claire spent the evening with close friends. They said she was radiant that night, laughing harder than usual, teasing about summer plans, even talking about the stack of essays waiting on her desk the next day. Nothing about her seemed unusual. Nothing hinted at danger. At 11:30 p.m., she hugged her friends goodbye and drove away, promising to text when she made it home. It was a 15-minute drive. She never arrived. She never sent that text. Somewhere in that small window of time, Claire disappeared. When officers reached her last known location, they saw no signs of struggle. No broken glass. No tire marks. Just fragments of a life suddenly interrupted. A phone, its screen shattered. Shoes left as though carefully placed. To detectives, it felt unnatural, almost staged. And then they checked her phone. Her final text message was chillingly vague. "I need to tell you something," sent at 11:46 p.m. To this day, no one knows what Claire needed to say. No one knows who she meant to send it to. And no one knows why she vanished minutes later. By morning, Claire's disappearance wasn't just a police matter. It became the heartbeat of Burlington. Volunteers searched parks, lakes, and trails. Flyers were posted on poles and storefronts. Her students lit candles at vigils, holding up signs that read, "Bring Claire home." Social media exploded with the hashtag #FindClaire. Strangers who never met her felt like they knew her because she reminded them of someone in their own lives. If this happened in your town, how would you respond? Would you join the search parties? Would you scroll through social media, looking for updates? Or would you find yourself checking over your shoulder at night, wondering if safety is ever guaranteed? From the start, Claire's disappearance wasn't just a mystery. It was a challenge to everything we believe about safety, about trust, about how a person can simply vanish. Investigators would follow dozens of leads, friends, colleagues, even strangers. They would uncover secrets, tangled relationships, and details that painted a far more complicated picture than anyone expected. And tonight, we're going to follow her story, step by step, from the final hours she was seen alive, to the desperate investigation that followed, to the haunting questions that remain unanswered. Because in the end, the disappearance of Claire Jensen isn't just about one woman. It's about all of us, and the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the people we love most can slip away without warning. By sunrise, word of Claire's disappearance had spread. Her parents hadn't heard from her. Her friends' calls went unanswered. And for her students, who expected to see her that morning in English class, there was only an empty desk, a silence that hung heavy over the room. For her mother, the last text she received from Claire was routine. "Good night. Love you." Nothing hinted at danger. Nothing suggested that just hours later, Her daughter would be the focus of a frantic search. If your loved one failed to come home, how long would it take before panic set in? An hour? 2? What if you knew, deep down, that something wasn't right? Investigators knew the first 24 hours were crucial. They retraced Claire's route from her friend's house to her apartment. It was just 6.2 miles, 12 minutes without traffic. Along that stretch of road, they looked for surveillance cameras, eyewitnesses, anything that could explain how a woman could vanish in such a short window of time. Neighbors told police about the scream they'd heard around midnight. But strangely, no one saw Claire. No car. No struggle. Just sound, and then silence. To detectives, the absence of physical evidence was troubling. To her family, it was devastating. Then, detectives uncovered something in Claire's digital footprint, something that would complicate the search even more. That final text, "I need to tell you something," was sent at 11:46 p.m. Investigators traced it to an unknown number, saved only as M. That message was never answered, and Claire never typed another word. Who was M? A friend? A coworker? A stranger? To investigators, it opened a dangerous possibility. Was Claire planning to reveal something? And if so, did she share it with the wrong person? Think about this. If you received a message like that, vague and unsettling, would you call back immediately? Would you ignore it? Or would you forever wonder what secret was about to be told? Before the world knew her name, Claire Jensen was simply Claire. She loved running along Lake Champlain trails at sunrise. She never missed Sunday dinner with her parents. Her students say she had a way of making them feel seen, even when no one else did. She had a laugh that carried across a room. She wasn't perfect. She could be stubborn, private about her own struggles. But those who loved her say she gave more than she ever asked for in return. And that's why, when she disappeared, it wasn't just a mystery. It was a wound, a void that rippled far beyond her classroom, her family, her circle of friends. It was the kind of story that makes you look around your own life, at your own people, and wonder, how fragile is the line between normalcy and tragedy? In cases like this, investigators always start close to home. They questioned her boyfriend, who admitted they had argued the night before. They spoke to a coworker who described recent tensions at school. And then, an ex-boyfriend surfaced, someone Claire had once accused of following her after their breakup. If you were the detective, who would you look at first? The partner with an argument? The coworker with a grudge? Or the ex who couldn't let go? For police, every answer only seemed to raise more questions. And when a piece of surveillance footage surfaced, everything changed. At 12:15 a.m., 45 minutes after Claire left her friend's house, security footage captured her car near a gas station. What investigators saw next was unclear. A figure moving near her vehicle, but the footage was too grainy to identify. Was it Claire? Was it someone else? The answer would open a new chapter in the search for truth. 911, what's your emergency? A simple question asked every night across America. But on this night, at 3:07 a.m., the answer would begin a mystery that still haunts a community to this day. On the other end of the line was a neighbor, panicked, confused, trying to put words to something that made no sense. He said he'd stepped outside for air when he saw it. A phone, lying face down on the concrete. Its screen smashed. Next to it, a pair of running shoes, neatly side by side, as if placed there. And beyond that, nothing. No Kleiderhinsen. No sound of footsteps. Just silence. Claire wasn't just anyone. She was a 36-year-old high school English teacher. The kind who stayed after class to help students who struggled. The kind who bought lunch for kids who couldn't afford it. Friends describe her as lighthearted, always smiling, a person who made life feel easier just by being there. She had plans. She had people who loved her. She had a life worth living. And in one night, it was gone. How does someone like Claire simply vanish? No sign of a struggle. No forced entry. No goodbye text. Just gone. How does someone like Claire simply vanish? No sign of a struggle. No forced entry. No goodbye text. Just gone. And here's the part that keeps everyone awake at night. Claire had no reason to disappear. No financial trouble. No history of running away. no dangerous lifestyle. If someone like Claire, someone grounded, someone beloved, can vanish into thin air, what does that mean for the rest of us? Have you ever walked down a dark street, late at night, and felt that nagging thought? What if someone's watching me? What if in a split second, your world changes and you never even see it coming? Police arrived within minutes. They found no footprints, no tire marks, no trace of where Claire might have gone. It was as if she had stepped off the face of the earth. But as investigators would soon discover, appearances can be deceiving. Hidden beneath the surface of Claire's life were secrets, tensions, and unanswered questions that no one could have predicted. And that is where our story begins. This is not just a disappearance. This is the vanishing that shocked a nation. And by the time we reach the end, you'll be asking yourself the same question investigators, friends, and family still ask today. What really happened to Claire Jensen? When police first arrived at the scene, they expected answers. Instead, they found nothing. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no indication that Claire had been forced into a car. Just a phone, a pair of running shoes, and silence. They scoured the neighborhood, knocking on doors, waking up residents, combing every inch of the street. But strangely, no one had seen or heard a thing. Not even a dog bark. Not even the slam of a car door. Think about that for a moment. A woman disappears in a quiet Vermont neighborhood without a sound. How is that possible? What does that say about how quickly, how silently someone can vanish? Detectives expanded their search radius. They pulled surveillance footage from nearby businesses. They retraced her last known movements. And one detail immediately stood out. Claire's running shoes, neatly placed side by side, as if someone had set them down. But Claire was not a runner. Friends and family confirmed she hated jogging. So why were they there? Were they meant to mislead investigators? Or was this Claire's silent cry for help before she vanished? The search effort exploded overnight. Friends, students, neighbors, all desperate to find Claire. Hundreds of volunteers combed the forests, the riverbanks, even drainage tunnels. And yet, every search ended the same way, empty-handed. Have you ever experienced that unsettling feeling when you look everywhere for something, and it's simply not there? Now, imagine that feeling, but with someone you love. The community held vigils. Parents clutched their children tighter. Students whispered in hallways. What happened to Ms. Jensen? And here's the chilling truth. The absence of answers was worse than any rumor. People wanted to believe she'd just left, that maybe she needed time away. But deep down, everyone knew something far more disturbing was at play. Police dug in her phone records. They interviewed colleagues, friends, even students. And slowly, tiny cracks in Claire's perfect image began to appear. She had recently ended a long-term relationship. She had exchanged heated emails with a parent upset about their child's grades. She'd even confided in a close friend that she felt watched. Have you ever ignored that feeling? The sense that someone's following you, even when no one is there? Was that what Claire had been experiencing? And if she told someone about it, why didn't they take her seriously? And just when the investigation seemed to stall, detectives uncovered something in Claire's personal life that changed everything, something that suggested her disappearance may not have been random at all. When investigators couldn't find Claire on the streets, they turned to her private world, her phone records, her emails, her journal. If someone had a motive, it had to be hidden in her life, and what they discovered surprised everyone. Claire was known as a beloved teacher, kind, patient, someone who stayed after class to tutor struggling students. But in her inbox, detectives uncovered heated exchanges with a parent who claimed Claire was targeting their child unfairly. The tone of those emails? Aggressive, threatening even. One message ended with words investigators couldn't ignore. You'll regret this. Have you ever said something in anger that you later regretted? What if those words became the centerpiece of a criminal investigation? But that wasn't the only clue. Claire's phone records revealed dozens of late-night calls to an unknown number, sometimes at midnight, sometimes as late as 2 or 3 in the morning. Who was on the other end? A friend? A secret relationship? Or someone she feared? Detectives traced the number, and to their surprise, It belonged to a man Claire had recently ended a long-term relationship with. Friends described him as charming at first, but increasingly controlling. He didn't want Claire going out alone. He questioned her every move. And just days before she vanished, she told a friend she was planning to cut ties with him completely. Was it possible Claire was trying to escape a relationship that had become dangerous? And if so, did he decide if he couldn't have her, no one could? Investigators brought him in for questioning. He denied everything, said he hadn't seen Claire in weeks. But there was one problem: cell phone tower data placed his phone near her neighborhood the very night she disappeared. Coincidence? Or a smoking gun? The more police dug, the more inconsistencies surfaced. His timeline didn't add up. His story kept changing. Yet, without a body, without direct evidence, they couldn't hold him. And here's the question that haunted everyone in town. If Claire truly feared for her safety, why didn't she go to the police? Did she underestimate the danger? Or was there someone else, someone even closer, who knew what really happened? The investigation began to split in two directions. Was this the act of a jealous ex? Or could that angry parent, the one who sent those chilling emails, have crossed the line from words to action? And then, just when police were narrowing their list of suspects, a shocking discovery would flip the entire case upside down, forcing investigators to reconsider everything they thought they knew about Claire Jensen's disappearance. Just when detectives thought they were closing in on Claire's ex-boyfriend, a phone call changed everything. A hiker, just a few miles outside of town, reported finding something unusual: a handbag lying half-buried in the dirt, with its contents scattered as if someone had tried to hide it in a hurry. It was Claire's. Inside were her keys, her ID, and her favorite necklace. The same necklace she never took off. For the first time, investigators had physical evidence tied directly to her disappearance. But here's the part that raised even more questions: the location. The bag was found miles away from her home, miles away from her school, in a direction that neither her ex-boyfriend nor the angry parent had any connection to. So who put it there? Detectives now faced a terrifying possibility. Was there a third suspect? Someone they hadn't even considered? Imagine being Claire's family. You've spent weeks believing investigators were circling in on an answer. You've been preparing yourself to face the ex-boyfriend in court. And then suddenly, a discovery like this tears the investigation wide open again. Would you feel hope that new evidence had surfaced? Or despair, realizing the truth might be even further away than before? Police doubled down. Forensic experts combed through the bag. And that's when they uncovered something shocking: traced DNA on the strap that didn't match Claire and didn't match her ex-boyfriend. The DNA belonged to a man with a criminal record, someone who lived less than 10 minutes from the wooded area where the bag was found, someone who had previously been arrested for stalking women in the community. Suddenly, a new name was on the board, a man Claire didn't seem to have any connection to. But if that's true, how did her bag end up in his territory? Was this a random abduction by a predator? Or could this man have been hired or manipulated by someone else to make Claire disappear? As detectives prepared to bring him in, the public was left in shock. The case had gone from what looked like a crime of passion to something much more complicated, something tangled in layers of personal relationships, secrets, and now, a possible stranger with a dangerous past. Who was this man? And most importantly, what did he know about the final moments of Claire Jensen's life? The man connected to Claire Jensen's handbag was brought in for questioning. His name, Daniel Harper, a 42-year-old with a long record of harassment and stalking. To the community, he was a loner. To investigators, he was now the prime suspect. Cut to image, a blurred mugshot of Daniel Harper, overlaid with police documents. From the moment he sat down across from detectives, Daniel looked calm, too calm. His hands folded neatly on the table, his voice steady, even polite. But detectives knew this wasn't the kind of man who walked away from women unharmed. Here's where things got interesting. When detectives showed Daniel photos of Claire, he didn't flinch. He didn't ask who she was. He simply said, "I've never seen her before." But remember, his DNA was on her handbag. So how could he possibly explain that? He claimed he stumbled upon the bag in the woods while walking, picked it up out of curiosity, and then left it behind. A neat explanation. Too neat. Detectives pushed harder. If that were true, why didn't he call police? Why didn't he turn it in? What do you think? Was this the nervous cover story of an innocent man caught in a web of suspicion, or the polished lie of someone who knew exactly what he'd done? As the hours dragged on, Daniel's calm began to crack. He contradicted himself. First, he said he'd never been near Claire's school. Minutes later, he admitted driving past it once or twice. Detectives circled in, pressing on the inconsistencies. They asked the question that lingered in everyone's mind. Had he followed Claire? He denied it, but his record told a different story. Just 2 years earlier, Daniel had been caught following a teenage girl home from a grocery store. The case never went to trial. But now, sitting across from detectives, that history loomed large. Imagine being Claire's parents, watching this unfold. Every detail another punch to the gut. Every word from Daniel's mouth twisting the knife deeper. Did they finally have the man responsible? Or was he just another piece in a puzzle that refused to fit? After hours of questioning, Daniel was released. Yes, released. The DNA linked him to the bag, but nothing tied him directly to Claire. No witnesses, no video, no confession. Without more, the case risked collapsing in court. And so the investigation shifted yet again. Who was Daniel Harper really? A predator who had crossed paths with Claire by chance? Or a pawn in a much larger, far more calculated plan? Police finally had someone in their sights. Daniel Harper, 42 years old, a history of harassment, a man described by neighbors as odd, withdrawn, and sometimes frightening. Now, here he was, sitting across from detectives in a small, windowless room, his future hanging by a thread. From the start, Daniel seemed calm. Too calm. His hands folded neatly on the table. His voice polite, almost rehearsed. Detectives wasted no time showing him a picture of Claire Jensen. And do you know what he said? He looked at the picture and said, "I've never seen her before. No hesitation. No flicker of recognition." But remember, his DNA was on Claire's handbag. The handbag she was last seen carrying. How could that be? Was it just a coincidence? Or was Daniel hiding something far darker? If you were sitting in that room, watching Daniel answer, would you believe him? Or would you see the mask slipping? Daniel explained it away. He said he stumbled upon the bag while walking in the woods, picked it up, then dropped it again. But detectives pressed him. If you found a missing girl's belongings, why not turn them in? Why vanish and stay silent? Would you buy that story? Be honest. How many of you would pick up a handbag in the woods and walk away without calling for help? Then came the contradictions. Daniel first claimed he'd never been near Claire's school. Minutes later, he admitted he had driven past it once or twice. Which was it? A slip of memory or a slip of guilt? Do you think people who lie in interrogations slip up like that because of nerves or because the truth eventually leaks out? Detectives dug deeper. They found that just 2 years earlier, Daniel had been caught following a teenage girl home from a grocery store. The case never went to trial. Now, think about this. If you were Claire's parents and you heard that history, what would you feel? Relief that he was caught, or rage that he had been free to walk the streets at all? The interrogation dragged on for hours. The tension rose. And then, shockingly, Daniel was released. His DNA linked him to the bag, yes. But without Claire's body, without a direct witness, without a confession, there simply wasn't enough to hold him. Do you think police made the right call? Or should they have kept him locked up, even if the evidence was thin? The clock was still ticking. If Daniel wasn't the killer, who was? And if he was, how many more lies could he tell before the truth finally caught up to him? Whenever someone vanishes, investigators always go back to the beginning, to those final hours, those final days. And for Claire Jensen, the truth was written in the small details most of us take for granted. Text messages, notes in her diary, the words she shared with friends. On the night before she disappeared, Claire texted her best friend Emily at 10:43 p.m. The message read, "I feel like someone's watching me again." Chilling words. Emily brushed it off, thinking Claire was just spooked. But now those words cut deeper than ever. If your best friend sent you a text like that, would you think twice? Would you take it seriously? Or would you reassure them the way Emily did? Investigators found Claire's journal, and on one page, scrawled hastily just a week before she vanished, she had written, "He was at the park again. I told Mom, but she says it's in my head. Who was he? Why didn't anyone act on those words?" Think about this. If you were Claire's parent and your daughter came to you saying she felt followed, what would you do? Would you call the police? Or would you dismiss it as teenage nerves? CCTV footage showed Claire leaving her high school at 3:17 p.m. on that cold January afternoon. She looked normal, backpack over her shoulder, headphones in her ears. She waved at a friend across the street and then walked away. That wave was the last known movement of Claire Jensen. But here's where it gets unsettling. Detectives noticed a dark sedan driving slowly in the background of that footage. The same car appears on another camera 2 blocks away, just minutes later, following her path. Do you think that car was just coincidence? Or was it the missing piece everyone overlooked? Claire never made it home. Her phone last pinged near the wooded trail she sometimes used as a shortcut. And when investigators retraced that path, they found footprints in the mud. 2 sets, one smaller, one larger, side by side until they stopped. What do you think happened in those woods? Did Claire know the person who walked beside her? Or was she forced? For Claire's family, the final days paint a haunting picture. A girl reaching out for help. A girl feeling hunted. A girl whose warnings may have been missed. And now, all that's left are fragments. Messages. Footsteps. Questions without answers. But those fragments would soon ignite a firestorm. Because someone out there knew the truth about what happened to Claire Jensen. Within hours of Claire's disappearance, police launched a full-scale investigation. Flyers were printed, volunteers combed the woods, and detectives began piecing together her last known movements. But every step forward seemed to open a dozen new questions. They traced the dark sedan. At first glance, it looked ordinary, a 2004 Toyota Camry. But when detectives pulled traffic cam footage, the same car appeared again, driving slowly near Claire's school 2 weeks before she vanished. The same car, circling her neighborhood on multiple occasions. If someone drove past your home several times, would you notice? Would you report it? Or would you dismiss it as nothing? Investigators built a timeline. Claire's phone disconnected at 3:42 p.m., just 25 minutes after she left school. The car was seen leaving the wooded trail at 3:47 p.m. But here's where it gets unsettling. Detectives noticed a dark sedan driving slowly in the background of that footage. The same car appears on another camera 2 blocks away, just minutes later, following her path. Do you think that car was just coincidence? Or was it the missing piece everyone overlooked? Claire never made it home. Her phone last pinged near the wooded trail she sometimes used as a shortcut. And when investigators retraced that path, they found footprints in the mud. 2 sets, one smaller, one larger, side by side until they stopped. What do you think happened in those woods? Did Claire know the person who walked beside her? Or was she forced? For Claire's family, the final days paint a haunting picture. A girl reaching out for help. A girl feeling hunted. A girl whose warnings may have been missed. And now, all that's left are fragments. Messages. Footsteps. Questions without answers. But those fragments would soon ignite a firestorm. Because someone out there knew the truth about what happened to Claire Jensen. Within hours of Claire's disappearance, police launched a full-scale investigation. Flyers were printed, volunteers combed the woods, and detectives began piecing together her last known movements. But every step forward seemed to open a dozen new questions. They traced the dark sedan. At first glance, it looked ordinary, a 2004 Toyota Camry. But when detectives pulled traffic cam footage, the same car appeared again, driving slowly near Claire's school 2 weeks before she vanished. The same car, circling her neighborhood on multiple occasions. If someone drove past your home several times, would you notice? Would you report it? Or would you dismiss it as nothing? Investigators built a timeline. Claire's phone disconnected at 3:42 p.m., just 25 minutes after she left school. The car was seen leaving the wooded trail at 3:47 p.m. But here's the twist. Police couldn't identify the driver. The plates were stolen. So, was this someone planning Claire's disappearance for weeks? Or was it a crime of opportunity? What do you think? Was Claire being stalked long before that day? Her classmates told investigators something chilling. Claire had confided that she saw the same man at her bus stop, the park, even outside the grocery store where her mother shopped. But nobody could describe him clearly, just that he was always there. A vague sketch was drawn. A man in his 30s. Average build. No distinct features. Nothing to pin him down. And yet, detectives knew they were circling closer. Have you ever had the feeling you were being followed? Did you trust your instincts? Or brush them off like Claire's friends did? In the woods, they uncovered something disturbing. A discarded sweatshirt. A half-empty bottle of water. And Claire's broken necklace. Forensic testing revealed partial DNA. Male DNA, but no match in any database. It was evidence, but evidence without a name, which meant the shadow following Claire was still invisible to the system. If DNA isn't enough, what else would you rely on to catch someone? Surveillance? Witnesses? Or is this where cases begin to go cold? As the investigation deepened, so did the community's desperation. Candlelight vigils, pleas on television, a reward fund that grew to thousands of dollars. Everyone wanted answers, but the answers refused to come. And then a new tip came in, one that would shift the entire investigation and place a shocking name on the board. Just when the case seemed to stall, a tip came from an unexpected source. A local store clerk reported seeing Claire in the days leading up to her disappearance, and she wasn't alone. A man had been trailing her through the aisles, standing too close, watching, pretending to shop, but never buying anything. The clerk remembered his face, and when detectives matched her description with their growing list of names, one stood out. Daniel Harper, a 34-year-old mechanic who lived just 5 miles from Claire's home. Harper wasn't a stranger to police. He had a prior record, nothing violent, but enough to raise red flags. Trespassing, loitering, an incident where he was caught following a teenage girl home from school. Would you consider those red flags warning enough? Or do you think people often dismiss past behaviors until it's too late? When detectives brought him in for questioning, Harper denied everything. He claimed he didn't know Claire. He said he was working on a client's car that afternoon. But when investigators checked his alibi, there were gaps. Hours of unaccounted time. And here's where the case twists again. Harper's car was a 2004 Toyota Camry. The same make and model seen circling Claire's school. But when forensic teams tore the car apart, nothing. No trace of Claire. No fibers. No fingerprints. No DNA. It was spotless. Almost too spotless. If someone cleans their car so thoroughly, does that scream guilt to you? Or could it simply be coincidence? Neighbors told reporters Harper was a quiet man. Kept to himself. Worked long hours. But others remembered something unsettling. He would watch the kids at the bus stop from his porch. Never saying a word, just watching. As word spread about Harper's possible involvement, the community became divided. Some believed police had found their man. Others were convinced he was just a convenient scapegoat. Do you think police sometimes focus too quickly on one suspect? Or should they double down when someone fits so many warning signs? Detectives faced mounting pressure. The family wanted answers. The public demanded justice. And the media followed Harper's every move. But without physical evidence, the case against him was fragile. Too fragile to hold up in court. And just when investigators thought they were closing in on Harper, another witness came forward. And this one would change everything. Her name was Margaret Lewis, a retired nurse, known in her neighborhood for being observant, cautious, and outspoken. She lived just 2 blocks from Claire's school. And what she told detectives that evening left them stunned. Margaret said that on the very afternoon Claire vanished, she saw a car circling the block. Not once, not twice, but at least 4 times. Each time slower, each time more deliberate. And sitting behind the wheel was Daniel Harper. She remembered the car vividly. The dents on the bumper, the faded paint. And she remembered the way Harper looked, leaning forward, scanning the sidewalk as though he was waiting for someone. If you saw the same car circling your street multiple times, would you brush it off as coincidence, or would your instincts tell you something was wrong? Detectives now had a credible witness placing Harper exactly where they feared he might have been, near Claire's school. But Margaret didn't stop there. She told them something else, something far more disturbing. Margaret recalled another day, just weeks before Claire disappeared. She claimed Harper parked across from the schoolyard and simply sat there for nearly half an hour, watching children play. She didn't call the police then. She told herself maybe he was just waiting for someone. Maybe she was overthinking. But now those moments came back to haunt her. How many times have we seen warning signs, only to ignore them until it's too late? Do you think Margaret should have reported him the first time she felt uneasy? With Margaret's testimony, detectives pulled Harper back in for questioning. They pressed harder this time. Why was he circling the school? Who was he looking for? Harper denied it all. He claimed Margaret was mistaken, that she was imagining things. But here's where it gets more complex. Harper's defense attorney painted Margaret as unreliable. An elderly woman with failing memory, they argued. Someone who was caught up in the frenzy of the case and convinced herself she saw what she wanted to see. Do you think eyewitness testimony is enough to make or break a case? Or should the justice system demand harder evidence before pointing fingers? The media seized on her story. Harper was now seen not just as a suspect, but as a predator hiding in plain sight. Margaret became both a hero for speaking out and a target for critics who believed she was making things worse. For detectives, Margaret's account was the missing piece. They now had motive, opportunity, and a potential eyewitness. But still, no physical proof, no body, no trace of Claire. And then something happened that no one expected. A discovery hundreds of miles away would shatter every theory investigators thought they had about this case. Hundreds of miles from Claire's hometown, a group of hikers stumbled upon something that would shake this case wide open. Deep in the woods, off a little-used trail, they noticed a small patch of disturbed earth. At first, it looked like nothing, just uneven soil. But then one of them saw it, a scrap of fabric, pink, torn, half buried beneath the dirt and leaves. And when investigators arrived, they realized it wasn't just fabric. It was a child's jacket, a jacket that matched the exact description of what Claire was wearing the day she disappeared. The discovery hit the community like a thunderclap. After weeks of uncertainty, this was the first real piece of evidence. But it also raised more chilling questions. If Claire had been taken, how did her jacket end up hundreds of miles away? What do you think this means? Was Harper moving around with Claire, or could someone else entirely be involved? Detectives swarmed the site. Cadaver dogs were brought in. They searched every inch of that forest for signs of Claire, her backpack, her shoes, anything. But after days of digging and combing through the undergrowth, nothing else was found. Just that jacket. Harper's defense was swift. His lawyers argued that the jacket proved nothing. They claimed it could have been planted. They even suggested the media frenzy had pushed people to create evidence where there was none. Do you believe the jacket was a genuine clue, or could it have been planted to frame Harper? And if so, by who? But for Claire's family, the jacket was undeniable. It was hers. Her mother broke down in tears when investigators showed it to her. She remembered the day she bought it, the way Claire twirled in front of the mirror, saying it made her feel like a princess. Now, that same jacket was torn, dirt-stained, and lying in a forest far from home. As a parent, imagine that moment. To see your child's clothing, proof they were out there, somewhere, but no child to bring home. Would you cling to hope, or would you begin to accept the unthinkable? The jacket reignited the case. Detectives doubled down on Harper. They subpoenaed his car records, his credit card receipts, even his cell phone tower data. And what they found was disturbing. Harper's phone had pinged off a tower less than 10 miles from where Claire's jacket was discovered. He couldn't explain why. He claimed he was just passing through. But passing through on the same day, Claire vanished. Do you think this is finally the smoking gun detectives were searching for? Or is it still just another piece of circumstantial evidence? Detectives knew they were close. The walls were closing in on Harper. But here's the thing about cases like these. Just when you think you've got the answers, another twist turns everything upside down. And the next twist would change everything they thought they knew about Harper, Margaret's testimony, and Claire's disappearance. Detectives believed they had Harper cornered. His phone data placed him dangerously close to the forest where Claire's jacket was found. To most, this seemed like a damning connection. But then a bombshell dropped. A truck driver, who had been silent for weeks, finally stepped into the spotlight. He claimed he saw something the very night Claire disappeared. A car pulled over on the side of the highway, just a few miles from that forest. And get this, he swore it wasn't Harper's vehicle. The driver described the car as an older model sedan, dark blue, with a woman standing next to it. He remembered the woman clearly, because she was shouting at a child in the back seat. And according to his description, that woman looked an awful lot like Margaret. This revelation sent shockwaves through the case. Could it be possible that Margaret, Harper's own sister, the one who testified against him, wasn't telling the whole truth? Could she have been more involved than anyone dared to believe? Do you think Margaret's testimony was a carefully crafted lie? Could she have been trying to protect herself while pointing the finger at her brother? Investigators dug deeper, and the deeper they went, the stranger things became. Margaret's timeline on the night of Claire's disappearance didn't quite add up. Phone records placed her in areas she swore she'd never been. Locations that just so happened to line up with the truck driver's sighting. It was as if Margaret had woven a story to frame Harper, while hiding her own involvement. For Harper, this was both a lifeline and a dagger. On one hand, the new lead cast doubt on the case against him. On the other, it meant his own sister might have been the true mastermind. How would you react if your own sibling turned against you in such a way? Would you still defend them? Or would you expose them to save yourself? Through all of this, one voice remained constant, Claire's mother. She didn't care if it was Harper, Margaret, or anyone else. All she wanted was her daughter back. The infighting, the blame game, none of it mattered compared to finding Claire. But just as hope was fading and suspicion was shifting, investigators stumbled upon something buried deep in Margaret's past. Something that would paint her in an even darker light. A secret that no one saw coming. And that secret would turn this entire case upside down. When investigators began combing through Margaret's past, they weren't sure what they'd find. But buried deep in records that hadn't seen daylight for years, they stumbled on something chilling. Something that hinted Margaret might not be as innocent as she appeared. Turns out, years before Claire's disappearance, Margaret had a history. Police reports documented disturbing incidents, fights with neighbors, violent outbursts, and accusations of abuse that were never fully pursued in court. And here's where it gets even darker. There was one particular case. A missing girl from Margaret's hometown, nearly 2 decades earlier. The case went cold. No arrests were made, but the description of the suspect back then bore an unsettling resemblance to Margaret herself. Was it just a coincidence? Or was Margaret hiding a pattern that stretched back years, maybe even decades? If police had connected those dots earlier, do you think Claire's disappearance could have been prevented? How much responsibility do we place on a justice system that overlooks red flags? And it wasn't just the past. Margaret's financial records revealed something else. Large, unexplained cash deposits in the weeks leading up to Claire's disappearance. Money she could never account for. Where did it come from? And more importantly, what was it for? Detectives began asking, could Margaret have been involved in something bigger? Human trafficking? Extortion? Or was it all connected to Claire herself? Do you believe Margaret was acting alone? Or could she have been part of a larger, more dangerous network? One retired investigator even admitted, if Margaret was anyone else, she'd have been treated as a prime suspect from the very start. But because she testified against Harper, she was seen as a victim, not a perpetrator. And Harper knew it. From behind bars, he shouted it to anyone who would listen. It wasn't me. It was her. It was always her. But was this just the desperate plea of a guilty man? Or was he finally telling the truth? If you were a juror in this case, who would you believe? Harper, the accused brother, or Margaret, the sister with a past shrouded in darkness? At the heart of it all, was still Claire, a young girl whose life was cut short, lost in the shadows of lies, secrets, and betrayal. And the terrifying truth was, the closer investigators got to uncovering Margaret's secret, the more dangerous it became for everyone involved. And what they discovered next would shake this case to its very core. For months, investigators had followed dead ends, false leads, and conflicting testimonies. But then a breakthrough, a single document that had been overlooked for years. And when they opened it, everything changed. It was a letter, not just any letter, but one that tied Margaret directly to Claire's final hours. Inside, detectives found a chilling detail, an address written in Margaret's handwriting, an address that matched the very storage unit where Claire's belongings had been found. Cut to slow zoom on the handwritten address. The screen flickers to black with heavy thudding sound effects. Narrator, intense. This was no coincidence. It was a smoking gun. Proof that Margaret knew exactly where Claire's things had been hidden. Proof she had lied to investigators from the very start. Question to viewers. If this letter had been found earlier, do you think Harper would have ever been convicted? Or was he simply the easiest scapegoat? Cut to Harper's prison cell. He's pacing, a mix of anger and despair on his face. Then shift to Margaret sitting calmly in an interview room, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. Narrator. And here's where it gets darker. A secret recording surfaced, one investigators hadn't known existed. A neighbor had recorded a heated argument between Margaret and Claire just days before the disappearance. In the recording, Margaret's voice can be heard threatening Claire. If you tell anyone, you'll regret it. This wasn't just a family dispute. This was a direct threat. And suddenly, Harper's claim that his sister had always been at the center of this tragedy didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. Do you think Harper was an innocent man who lost years of his life to a wrongful conviction? Or do you believe both siblings were somehow involved in Claire's disappearance? But the most shocking detail was still to come. Investigators discovered bank transfers from Margaret to an unknown account overseas. Large sums of money deposited just days after Claire went missing. Where was that money going? And who was on the other end? This case was no longer just about a missing girl. It was about something bigger, something darker, that stretched beyond this family's secrets. And Margaret was at the center of it all. If the money trail leads to a larger criminal network, do you think Margaret was a mastermind or just a pawn in something she couldn't control? And what investigators uncovered next would force them to face an unthinkable reality. The case that had haunted a community for decades was about to take a dramatic turn. The letter, the recording, the money trail, it all converged into one undeniable conclusion. Margaret was no longer just a witness. She was a suspect. But just when it seemed like the walls were closing in on her, something extraordinary happened. A new witness came forward. Someone no one expected. I saw Margaret the night Claire disappeared. She wasn't alone. She wasn't alone. That statement blew open the case in ways investigators had never imagined. If Margaret wasn't acting alone, who was with her? Was this a family conspiracy? Or was there an unknown player pulling strings in the background? The footage was blurry. The face couldn't be made out. But the build, the movements, it looked disturbingly familiar. Some believed it was Harper, caught on tape despite his claims of innocence. Others were convinced it was a stranger, a partner, an accomplice. Do you think Harper lied all along? Or was someone else protecting Margaret in exchange for silence or money? It wasn't just a random name. It belonged to someone Margaret had been connected to for years, a family friend. Someone who had slipped under the radar during the initial investigation. Someone who, until now, no one had suspected. And suddenly, the story wasn't just about a sister, a brother, and a missing girl. It was about a circle of secrets, lies woven so tightly that it took decades to unravel them. If you were on that jury, knowing all this, would you believe Margaret orchestrated everything? Or do you think she was protecting someone much darker, someone who still hasn't been named? The mask was slipping, and what was about to be revealed would destroy everything. By now, Margaret's silence was deafening. Every piece of evidence, every letter, every bank transfer, every blurred image pointed back to her. But then, the prosecution dropped the one thing no one saw coming. They had obtained newly declassified FBI files. Files that revealed Margaret had been under surveillance years before Claire's disappearance. Why? Because of her connection to a man investigators had only just begun to suspect. Richard Kellan, a longtime family friend. A man who appeared in the background of family photos, barbecues, school events. To most, he was harmless. But hidden beneath that exterior was a history of fraud, violence, and corruption. And suddenly, his name was the one tied to the offshore account. The bank account wasn't hers. It was his. But Margaret had access. And that detail shifted the entire narrative. So what do you think? Was Margaret simply the pawn in Richard Kellan's game? Or was she the one pulling strings, using him as a shield? Investigators realized it wasn't Harper in the passenger seat that night. It was Richard. He was with Margaret. And suddenly, Harper's story didn't sound so unbelievable after all. For decades, Harper had lived under suspicion. The community branded him a liar, a coward. But what if he had been telling the truth all along? If you were Harper, locked away, accused of betraying your own family, how would you feel seeing this evidence come alight now? Would you forgive? Or would you demand justice, no matter the cost? The truth was unraveling. Witnesses had been paid. Alibis had been bought. And through it all, Margaret had stood by Richard. Loyal, silent, complicit. And so the question became not just who took Claire, but how many people helped cover it up. After weeks of testimony, the trial had built to this moment. The defense had their story. The prosecution had their bombshells. But what no one expected was the confrontation that followed. Mrs. Lane, who was in the car with you the night Claire vanished. Was it Harper? Or was it Richard Kellan? The room held its breath. For 30 years, the truth had been buried. Now, all eyes were on her. It wasn't Harper. It was Richard. He was there. He told me what to do. He told me we had no choice. And in that single sentence, everything changed. For the first time, Harper's story was validated. For the first time, the world saw him not as the villain, but as the man who had been silenced. If you were Harper, would this admission be enough? Or would you still want every person involved to pay the price for what they'd done? She's lying. She was the one who planned it. I just went along. It was the nightmare prosecutors had hoped for, the accused turning on each other. Each word another crack in their defense. Each accusation another piece of the puzzle falling into place. And yet, through the shouting, through the finger-pointing, one truth remained undeniable. Claire was gone, and someone, somewhere, had to answer for it. Who do you think bears the greatest guilt here? Margaret, for protecting Richard. Richard, for orchestrating it? Or the system itself, for failing Claire all these years? The walls of silence had finally cracked. But what came next would shake the courtroom to its core. After days of deliberation, the jury had reached a decision. The world outside waited. Families of the accused, reporters from every network, and a community desperate for closure. Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. This was it. 30 years of secrets. 30 years of silence. 30 years of justice denied. It all came down to this moment. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant, Richard Kellan, guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant, Margaret Lane, guilty. In the end, the walls of deception crumbled. Richard and Margaret, once untouchable, now faced the weight of justice. And Harper, for the first time in decades, was no longer alone in bearing the blame. But here's the question. Does this verdict truly bring justice? Can a guilty verdict after decades of silence ever heal the wound left by Claire's disappearance? If you're on that jury, would you have voted the same way? Do you believe Margaret deserved prison for her silence? Or do you think Richard bore the greater guilt as the mastermind? The verdict was in, but for those left behind, the question lingered, was justice truly served? The verdict had been delivered. Guilty. For many, it was a victory, proof that no one, no matter how powerful, could hide forever. But for others, it was just the beginning of another kind of pain. Richard Kellan had once been the man others admired, sharp, successful, commanding respect. Now he was just another inmate waiting for his sentence. Margaret Lane, a woman who had spent her life building a family and community ties, would now spend her remaining years behind bars. And then there was Harper. For 30 years, he carried the weight of suspicion, branded as unstable, a liar, a man who couldn't move on. For him, the verdict was vindication. Yet, he remained behind prison walls, paying for other crimes, even as the truth of Claire's fate finally came to light. For Claire's family, the courtroom win didn't bring her back. It didn't erase the decades of not knowing, the birthdays missed, the years of aching silence. Justice, they realized, was never going to be perfect. It was only a step closer to peace. And what about the community? Can a small town ever truly heal when betrayal came from its most trusted leaders? When secrets were buried so deep, it took decades to uncover them. What would you feel? Anger that it took so long? Or relief that the truth finally surfaced? The gavel struck again. Sentences delivered. The chapter officially closed. Justice had been written on paper. But the wound Claire's disappearance left behind would never fully heal. For some, justice came too late. For others, it was enough. But for all, it was unforgettable. What do you believe? Was this true justice? Or was it only the closest thing possible after 30 years of silence? The trial was over. Sentences have been handed down. But a story like this doesn't simply end with a gavel strike. It lingers, echoing through the years, reshaping how people remember, how they trust, and how they carry on. In this small town, once defined by quiet streets and friendly faces, the case became a permanent reminder that appearances can mislead, that even those who seem beyond suspicion may be hiding truths too heavy to carry. Law schools and criminal justice courses began dissecting the case. How did it stay hidden for so long? What failures allowed Harper to be scapegoated for decades? And most importantly, what changes must be made so another Claire never disappears unnoticed? And outside the courtroom, the story spread far and wide. Documentaries, podcasts, even true crime books picked apart every detail. But here's the question. When real lives are at stake, does retelling these tragedies bring justice, or does it risk turning pain into entertainment? What do you think? For Claire's loved ones, legacy isn't measured in headlines or legal debates. It's measured in memory, in making sure her life was more than just a case file, more than just a trial. Each year, they gather, not just to mourn her loss, but to remind the world that she lived, that she mattered. Claire's story left a mark on the justice system, on her community, and on all who heard it. The legacy she left behind wasn't in her death, but in the lessons of truth, persistence, and the courage to face what others tried so hard to bury. Do you believe cases like Claire's can truly change the way society handles justice? Or are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes until another story forces us to confront them? We've walked through a story of silence, of shadows, of truths hidden for decades. A story that began with a young woman named Claire, bright, hopeful, full of dreams, and ended with a courtroom decades later, where justice finally caught up with time. But justice, when delayed, carries a cost. For Harper, the cost was years of stolen freedom, years of being branded for something he did not do. For Claire's family, the cost was decades without answers, decades where grief had no closure. And for the community, the cost was trust shattered, perhaps forever. So here's the question I leave with you tonight. How do we measure justice? Is it in the guilty verdict? In the freedom of the innocent? Or in the lessons we, as a society, choose to carry forward? And more importantly, will we remember Claire as just another case, or as a reminder to always keep asking the hard questions, even when the answers are uncomfortable? In the end, this was never just about the crime. It was about a community forced to confront its blind spots, about a justice system that faltered but eventually found its way, and about one young woman, Claire Kellan, whose voice was silenced, but whose story will never, ever be forgotten. This is her legacy. The mystery doesn't end here. Subscribe now and join us as we uncover more chilling, unsolved cases.